Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here and you like movies, whether it be blockbusters, hidden gems, or everything in between, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases and some classics. Today, let's talk about Bill and Ted Face the Music. This sees the return of writers Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson, who co-wrote the first two movies, and is directed by Dean Parasot, who also directed Galaxy Quest. And it once again stars Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves as Bill and Ted respectively, whose band, Wild Stallyns, has hit an all-time low, and as a result, they're failing the prophecy that their songwriting would unite the world and create a better future. This causes Kelly, played by Kristen Schaal, who's the daughter of their old friend Rufus, to hand them the time machine once more so they can save the future. I only just saw the first two Bill and Ted movies last week, and I'll leave a link to my reviews of both of them in case you missed them, so I had no real attachment to this franchise, though I did enjoy both movies. I gotta admit though, I was still slightly hesitant going into this because sequels taking place so many years after the last film can be extremely hit and miss. The nostalgia train is big, and while there have been quite a few sequels that are surprisingly very good, I try to temper my expectations. But I was pleasantly surprised by this. I can safely say Bill and Ted is a franchise worth revisiting so many years later, and this sequel is most excellent. If you're a big fan of the franchise and have been eagerly awaiting this, you won't be disappointed. While Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey went in a different direction than Excellent Adventure, this film goes back to the first film's roots and builds upon it into something much bigger. While Bill and Ted are off on their own adventure trying to find inspirations for their song, there's a separate story where their daughters Billy and Thea, played by Bridget Lundy Payne and Samara Weaving respectively, take a separate time machine so they can, like their fathers once did, round up historical figures, but this time so they can put a band together. And I was smiling ear to ear during these scenes. I thought both Bridget Lundy Payne and Samara Weaving were awesome together. They talk pretty much the exact same way as Bill and Ted do. They use the same surfer lingo, they're saying things like whoa and excellent, but they don't just do a stale imitation. Their dynamic with each other is similar, but they have their own way of processing things and their own ways of thinking through situations, so they still made it their own thing. Plus, the subplot itself was just a fun callback to the first movie, and what I liked too was they did more with less. Bill and Ted in Excellent Adventure rounded up a lot of people from the past, but Billy and Thea only go after 5 people to form the band, so we got a lot more interactions between the main characters and the historical figures, and they were just nice moments because they would go to find someone who influenced the person they were currently dealing with. It wasn't just rounding up random people. The historical figures all built connections with one another in addition to Billy and Thea, and we can all relate to wanting to meet our heroes, so I like that. This is also the most time travel focused of the 3 movies. Both sets of characters are bouncing around the past and the future for about 3/4 of the movie. Like Excellent Adventure though, don't worry so much about the rules. A lot of time travel movies try to center on a set of rules, but Bill and Ted has never really been about that. You really have to just go with the flow. And they kind of dig at that at times. What helps is that Bill and Ted are not the brightest protagonists around, so the writing's able to hide behind that a bit. And what I mean is, there are times where one version of Bill and Ted is trying to explain something to another iteration of them, and they just start confusing themselves. Like, this doesn't even really make sense to them, and they try brushing it off or just try to do the best they can with it, and they're not expecting you to look that deep into things either. And on a related note, this also establishes tone a little better than Bogus Journey. It leans in a lot more to the sillier aspects of Excellent Adventure, with all these ridiculous scenarios at the forefront, like some of the characters they cross paths with, and the logic behind wanting to do certain things. Like, they had a falling out with Death, once again played by William Sadler, and it's because they filed a lawsuit against him, which is hysterical to just say out loud. But it establishes, even though this is still the Bill and Ted we know and love, they are older and they matured just a bit. And I place a lot of emphasis on just a bit. So there are a few moments where it takes itself a little more seriously than Excellent Adventure. But Bogus Journey had a few moments where it played the entire scene totally straight-faced, and then moved to a completely separate scene that was funny, so it just came off as jarring at times. I think this did a better job of being serious, but specifically by playing up these ludicrous scenarios and putting all this energy into something small, which in this case is just figuring out the right song. And the scenarios in question are a lot more colossal this time than in Excellent Adventure or Bogus Journey. So I think this succeeded on what sequels are supposed to do, or at least what most sequels are supposed to do, which is to go at least a little bigger and bolder than their predecessors. But this doesn't totally reinvent the wheel, to be clear. It's still, like the first two movies, a good film that you can still just sit back, relax, not have to overthink, and just have a good time watching, just with a little more emotional stakes. The only thing I'd really really say in terms of criticisms was there's a subplot where Bill and Ted have some marital troubles. They're still married to the princesses from the first two movies, and they go to couples therapy. Jillian Bell plays the therapist, and the gag is both couples are in couples therapy together, which is part of the reason they're there in the first place, because they're just that joined at the hip. And it was mostly funny, and Jillian Bell herself was fine, if underutilized, but in the end, it's a subplot that kind of fizzled out. It started off stronger than it ended, but it wasn't bad, it was fine. Just compared to everything else, it was easily the weakest link. As for Bill and Ted themselves, they are once again a lot of fun. Even though this picks up nearly 30 years later, it was like we didn't miss a beat with them. It's like we just saw them yesterday, and both Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves are hilarious. I know Alex Winter has kind of stayed off the big screen since the first two movies, outside of some small roles here and there, so it was great to see him come back for this. And Keanu Reeves is also just fantastic. It's even funnier seeing him here than the first two movies, to be honest, because not only is he now known as the badass star of John Wick, and he's now kind of known as one of the coolest guys in Hollywood, but his voice has gotten considerably deeper, more noticeably than Alex Winter, so it just makes him doing the Ted voice now as this guy in his 50s with a deep voice was just on its own funny to me. I don't know if any of you felt the same way, but I was sometimes laughing whenever he just said something that wasn't even necessarily funny. And the rest of the cast was great. I'd love to see a spin-off with Samara Weaving and Bridget Lundy Payne as Billy and Thea, because they were just awesome together. Kristen Schaal was also good. George Carlin unfortunately has long since passed away, so instead she interacts with her mother, played by Holland Taylor, and they have this dynamic made up of mostly arguing, and I got just faint flashes of Louise from Bob's Burgers, who Schaal also voices and is also a very combative character, so she was great. I got some good laughs out of her. I also loved William Sadler returning as Death. He is still just as vain and petty as he was in Bogus Journey. Like when we first see him, he's playing hopscotch and he's talking to himself, challenging himself, saying things like best out of 70 something. And the other big highlight was Anthony Carrigan in a role that I wasn't aware of going into it, so I won't spoil it, but all I'll say is if you've seen him in the show Barry, there's a similar vibe here to that character, just on a bigger scale. But I'd also say if you're not a fan of the Bill and Ted movies to begin with, I don't think this will win you over. While I stand by it's different in some regards, to be clear, it's the same two writers as the last two movies. The sense of humor is still more or less in the same vein, so if you didn't like the first two movies, you're more than likely not gonna like this. I'd be surprised if you do. Overall, this movie was most excellent, and honestly a lot better than I was expecting it to be. It maintains the essence of what made the first two movies enjoyable and manages to do a lot more with it. It's obviously not the perfect movie, but it's one you can just have a good time watching. The jokes are great, the scenarios are ludicrous, and both Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter are hilarious. Honestly, and this is mainly because we haven't gotten a ton of big releases this year with the pandemic, but this is one of the better movies I've seen this year. Bill and Ted Face the Music gets an 8.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see Bill and Ted Face the Music, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like it more than the first two movies? Less than the first two movies? Would you like to see more of Bill and Ted, or is this enough for you? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.